Good evening. My name is Myra Olenek, and I'm the director here at the Peters Township Public Library. I want to welcome all of you here to our evening of our Vietnam Veterans Discussion Panel. Before we get into the logistics of tonight, I do want to explain a few things about our other Vietnam programming this year. We have, first of all, over to your right, we have a series of videos that are playing. Jim McNutt and Diane Leone from the Peters Township Library Foundation have worked very closely with local Vietnam veterans. There are 8 stories. They're not all veterans, but they have stories that relate to memories of the Vietnam War. And so beyond our refreshment table, we hope that you will take the opportunity. If not tonight, come back because we'll have it set up here in the center of our lobby. And we'd certainly love for you to hear their stories. They were kind enough to share, and Jim and Diane have done a fabulous job of editing them and asking just the right questions to get wonderful stories. So that's going to be playing. Also, another part of the logistics tonight, speaking of Jim and Diane, Jack and Diane, Jim and Diane, we are, if you would be interested and you wanted to share any of your impressions afterwards, Jim and Diane are going to be looking for your impressions, short little memories, or not necessarily memories of the war, but impressions of tonight. So they're going to be coming around with the microphone and would certainly welcome that. Also, speaking of the Vietnam War, we mentioned that tonight's program will reflect on episodes 1 and 6 of the Ken Burns documentary series. Between now and November, we're going to cover all the episodes, and we'll have on our website the different times that they'll be playing upstairs in our reading room. So if you haven't had a chance to watch the series, or there were certain episodes that you missed, please check our website and come and join us for more of the documentary. And what that will all lead up to, speaking of Vietnam, is in November, we're bringing the author, thanks to our Peters Township Library Foundation, we're bringing the author of The Things They Carry, that is Tim O'Brien. He'll be joining us November the 8th, so we hope you'll save the day. We've given you some little takeaways tonight. Put that on your refrigerator. Tickets are going to go on sale in June, perfect for Father's Day. And if you would want to purchase the book, we have them on sale at our desk tonight, and we'll have them on sale all through the summer. But we'll have a pre-event price, so we certainly hope if you'd like to read the book before Tim O'Brien comes. He is also a Vietnam veteran. This is one of those classics of American literature that really looks back at a very important part of history, and Tim shares his impressions through fiction, but definitely based on a lot of his experiences. And then the last little takeaway you have on your page from us is this program coming up in May. It's called Carl's Story. And Margaret Deitzer, who helped us with tonight's program, is coordinating this one. This is the story of a gentleman named Carl Willig, and it's the story that will talk about how his remains were brought back from World War I. There was a Centennial Commission that honored his remains. He was from McKeesport, and we have the story of his life and that journey of his remains back to our country. So, lots of things to happen. And Todd, waiting patiently, we are so honored to have created this wonderful partnership. I know it started a long time ago with Margaret, and we just keep finding more things that you know about it. He's quite a wealth of information. So tonight, we have Todd DePastino here. We actually got to visit Todd in action at the Veterans Breakfast Club just a few weeks ago. Members of the foundation and members of the library staff. Margaret was here, Jim was here. And we learned so much about many of you that are here in our audience tonight. So we thank you for joining us. I know Todd has some information for you about the Veterans Breakfast Club, and he's going to introduce our panelists tonight, and Todd is going to be our moderator. So thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you all for coming out on an unseasonably chilly April night to talk about the Ken Burns series, the Vietnam War, with 4 distinguished Vietnam veteran panelists. I'm Todd. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. My job tonight is to keep the peace and moderate the discussion. And I do want to invite everybody to participate in Veterans Breakfast Club events. We do a lot of them. We do 65 a year. Many of our best ones and biggest ones are in the South Hills. Our schedule is right here. This is our schedule through June. We'd love to have you join us. You don't need to be a veteran to attend. We love to have family members, friends of veterans, neighbors, anybody who's interested in history or just loves to hear good stories to come out and join us. You never quite know what you're going to hear, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. Our mission, as we put it, is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories. So I do invite all of you to attend whenever you can. Would love to have you. I thought I would, I just want to thank Myra for making this possible. Maura Kelly of the Peters Township Library Foundation. We have Margaret Deitzer, who worked so hard to put this together, along with Carrie Weaver, to get the word out about this. It's so wonderful working with this library. They are so good at connecting with the community and really putting on professional programs. It's a joy and an honor to participate in this wonderful community you've created here at this library. In a moment, I'll introduce our panel, but I thought, I'm a historian, maybe I should provide a little bit of frame, a kind of a frame of reference for the discussion that you're going to hear. It's based on the PBS Ken Burns series, 10 parts, 18 hours, that first aired in September of 2017. I noticed right away when it started airing that our veterans started talking about it. There was a lot of buzz. They were reacting very powerfully to each night's episode. They were reacting with rage and sometimes bewilderment, a lot of times recognition. And it was just fascinating to hear their responses to what they were seeing and hearing. And we thought right away this might be a good thing to kind of break off from our usual events and go into a deeper dive, which is why we wanted to do it here. The Ken Burns, you know, not many people can do 18 hours on PBS, but he gets to do it. And it got 34 million viewers in the fall, averaged 7 million per episode. It was not the first PBS blockbuster series on Vietnam. Some of you may be old enough to remember the Stanley Carnell series from 1983, Vietnam, A Television History. I certainly remember that. That received 10 million viewers, many more than Ken Burns did, and really riveted the country in November and December 1983. And it was about that time, 1983, that kind of three schools of thought had coalesced about the Vietnam War. This is 8 years after the fall of Saigon. And historians and critics kind of grouped in different schools of interpretation about the war. By far the dominant, still dominant, interpretation of what we call the orthodox interpretation of the war, or maybe the liberal interpretation of the war, which is that the war was a tragic blunder. It was an avoidable mistake. That war planners had misjudged the enemy, underestimated the enemy, overestimated the efficacy of firepower, had misconstrued Vietnamese nationalism, had unfortunately discounted the strength of Vietnamese nationalism, and that the war, if victory was possible, it probably would not have been worth it with the cost it would have taken to win. It was a mistake that could have been avoided. The Orthodox interpretation grants it was a noble fight. It was a fought with good intentions to restrict the expansive forces of communism throughout the world. It was just an unaccommodating battlefield. We picked the wrong spot to fight that fight. It just didn't work the way the planners had thought it would. Opposing this orthodox view, or maybe this liberal view, and I should say, the Ken Burns series absolutely is the latest expression of this orthodox point of view. And in fact, there's one line that gets off-quoted from the very first hour, probably the very first 20 minutes of the episode, of the whole series, that gives it away as adhering to the orthodox point of view. And I'll read that line now verbatim, because it sums up very well the Orthodox point of view. It was begun, meaning the war, it was begun in good faith by decent people out of fateful misunderstandings, American overconfidence, and Cold War miscalculation. That's it in a nutshell. The opposing the Orthodox point of view was the radical point of view that said the war wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just impractical. It was fundamentally immoral. That in Vietnam, the United States served as an imperialistic bully that tried to smother with disproportionate violence the legitimate aspirations of the Vietnamese people for independence and self-governance. We were on the wrong side of history and the wrong side of morality. A book that kind of summarizes this point of view, or as an expression, is maybe Marilyn Young's book about Vietnam, Gabriel Kolko's books on Vietnam. When I taught a course on Vietnam, I would assign Martin Luther King's speech from April 4th, 1967 at Riverside Church in New York City, where he lays out the whole history of Vietnam in a perfect expression of the radical interpretation of the war. Finally, the third school of thought, which is much smaller than the Orthodox school of thought, is the Revisionists. The Revisionists emerged in the 1980s as a counter to the Orthodox school, and they argued that the war was winnable. It could have been won. I noticed that, George, you brought in maybe one of the first expressions of the revisionist point of view, Harry Summers' very thin book on strategy. Harry Summers, Lewis Sorley, authors like that argued that the war could have been won. It could have been won if we had used, they disagree. They disagree how to complete that sentence. More firepower, more men, more time, more support from the American people, more political will in Washington, D.C. There are many different varieties of how we could win. The distinctions among these schools of thought have really begun to collapse rapidly these last few years. Maybe we'll have some time to talk about that a little bit. But I noticed, for example, there are conservative authors like Lewis Sorley coming out with books saying we could have won if we had used less firepower, if we had focused more on land reform, social justice in Vietnam, if we would have protected villages more, if we hadn't alienated the population like William Westmoreland had in the early years of the war. So it's interesting. There seems to be a convergence of interpretations of Vietnam. So, in other words, the Ken Burns series, as you might expect, in reference to these schools of thought, plays it straight down the middle. And I'm curious to hear what our panelists thought and experienced when they watched it. Not only what they think about it in retrospect, but what they felt as they were watching it for the first time, what their responses were. But let me introduce our panelists. You guys ready? All right. First, we have George Dvorak here. He served in the Army in 1968. He served in Vietnam in 1967 and 1968 with the 229th Supply and Service Company. He was a company commander. We have 2 officers, 2 enlisted men, so it's almost a fair fight. Near Long Binh, near Saigon. We have Ron Worstell, who was drafted and served in Vietnam in 1968 as a radio operator with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, near Saigon, west of Saigon. He has returned to Vietnam twice, and once for humanitarian work, and he has also is a faithful servant at the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. We have Edie Blanc with us. Ed was a Duquesne University ROTC graduate. He shipped over to Vietnam with the 40th Signal Battalion in August 1966. And then he became a company commander, another company commander, for the 267th Signal Company while in country. He spent much time traveling, digging trenches, putting up poles for the critical role of fostering communication among our far-flung forces in South Vietnam. And then finally we have the sole Marine on our panel. See what I mean about keeping the peace? Andy served with the Marines in Gulf Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines in I Corps near the DMZ. In 1968, he was grievously wounded in September or October? October 1968. And after a long recovery, became one of the founders, I think you have to say, of the Vet Center, carving out a portion of the VA that could serve veterans at storefronts, make it accessible, make counseling accessible to veterans, and he spent a long career counseling combat veterans with the VA. Let's give them a round of applause and then ask them. George, I'm going to start with you. What was your response or feeling as you watched the Ken Burns series? Did it bring back a lot of memories?
It did. It actually...
You talking to the mic?
How about this?
Perfect.
Okay. It brought back a lot of memories. It told me about a lot of things I didn't really know about ever. You would be amazed at how narrow one's viewpoint is when you have something to do. You don't know about political things? No, I didn't know about political ramifications. I didn't know about the history of Vietnam, how we got where we were, how they got where they were, and I occupied my day doing my job. I didn't know what was going on many places. So...
You were too busy being a company commander.
Yeah, that's in a nutshell. Yeah, like I had 100 guys, okay? We were Long Binh. One of our jobs was to feed 50,000 people a day, okay? And our job was, they would come every morning. There would be long lines of deuce and a halves. And they would hand my sergeants a morning report. The vocabulary, I just have to use my vocabulary here. And it was on a company basis. They had 220 people in their company, and they got 3 cases of steaks and 5 cases of bread and 4 cases of juice and 3 cases of potatoes, and then they drove away. And we did that. And that was for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we did that every day. And that was a big job. Just feeding 50,000 people 3 times a day, every day, because every day there was food, you know, and we had a lot of stuff to do. So,
did the series at all kind of change or shape your view of the war in retrospect? Kind of change any assumptions that you had or how you viewed your service?
yes, I think I can summarize my feelings about that war in a nutshell. I don't really have much problem doing that. I don't believe that the stated political goal could have been achieved by military force alone. And I saw everything from helicopters flying over, lots and lots and lots of helicopters flying over, a lot of ammunition being sling-loaded over my head, heard machine guns every night, heard artillery every night, saw flares every night, but I didn't have that context. But now that I have heard his presentation and watched his presentation, I think he did a pretty balanced job. And as far as I'm concerned, the people that come out the worst in that thing were the very top political and military leadership of our service. So.
Thank you, George. Can I hear from Ron? What was your response, Ron, when you watched the video? I just imagine you were a combat veteran. I mean, you were in it on patrol, getting shot at, shooting. Was it hard to watch?
Not as hard as what I thought it was going to be. I thought I would have to walk away at times. A lot of my friends, I told them, keep an open mind. This is a lot of different perspectives being presented. Some you will agree with, some you won't. don't throw a brick through your flat screen because you'll have to buy a new one. It wasn't worth it.
Who might you throw a brick at if you saw speaking about the war on the screen?
There's one lady that was
Okay.
annoying for a while.
That's who came to mind. All right.
But there was a lot of information there that I wasn't aware of. The 2 years that I spent in the Army, our communications, our information pool about what was going on in our world was very minimal. In country, we got a newspaper maybe once a week if we were lucky, and that may be 2 weeks old when we got it. We had some information that was sent to us by our families, but that was it. We just really didn't know what was going on.
So I'd ask the audience to consider that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ron. That when you're in it, fighting, you don't really have, and I hear this over and over from our veterans, you don't really have this broader perspective. You're really focusing on the square ground or the ship planks that you're on, doing your job. So many people depend on you doing your job. You don't really have time or inclination to think more broadly about the war. And not only that, but you really don't get much information. Nobody really tells you what's going on.
And if we got it, I don't know what we would have done with it. I mean, it was all about survival.
Yeah.
We would have set that aside because that wasn't important at the moment.
I see Andy nodding in agreement over there. Andy, I know you had a strong reaction to the series.
I did. I want to first begin thanking Dr. DePastino, Miss Alderneck, and Miss Kelly for organizing this event tonight. Also, Dr. DePastino, you were all very flattering about my role in the Vet Center. I was a therapist there. It was one of the first vet centers opened in Pittsburgh in 1979. I was certainly not one of the founders. I just happened to be.
You were one of the rabble-rousers and agitators that got the Vet Center created.
Rebels, Mavericks, yes we were.
Okay.
Yes we were. And
You're a Marine after all.
our movement began in 1979.
Okay.
So, when I began thinking about the documentary, the first thought that came to my mind was how sad it is that we are still discussing Vietnam and the profound impact that it has had on so many lives after 60 years. Not 50, 60s. When I viewed the documentary, it elicited many emotions. I wasn't sure how to interpret. So what I did was I viewed the documentary through 3 separate lenses. One, as a 19-year-old boy, warrior. Then I viewed it as a disabled Vietnam veteran. And then thirdly, I viewed it as a 68-year-old human being history student. The first 2 characters are the actual description. The third character, it was just my impressions about the documentary. As I viewed the documentary through the lens of a 19-year-old warrior, I determined that I fought in Vietnam to be with my brothers, to survive, to defend and protect my comrades. I did not serve and fight in Vietnam to represent, defend, or protect the United States. The second lens I viewed the documentary through was that as a Vietnam combat veteran. The documentary really did not provide any new information for me other than to learn about the history of the country. The documentary did confirm many facts about Vietnam, that it was not a military war, but rather it was a political conflict. As a disabled Vietnam combat veteran, I have learned to live with the horrors of being a warrior. I have learned to appreciate life and live life to the fullest, and not as the living dead and just exist. I have learned to cope with the survival guilt, the normal survival guilt of surviving when your comrades did not. The survival guilt that I have not been able to cope with, nor will I ever resolve, is the survival guilt about inflicting the pain, suffering upon my parents, my family, my wife, my sons, and friends. They did not choose to go to Vietnam. I did. You choose the behavior, you choose the consequences. They did not deserve the residuals of the war. I have alleviated the survival guilt, as I said. Also, as a disabled Vietnam veteran, I've accepted my responsibility and accountability for all my actions and behaviors that I committed, no matter how horrific. I did whatever it took to survive, defend, and protect my comrades. I truly believe that the enemy that I fought in Vietnam was a created enemy. My true enemy was here in the United States. I recently had the privilege and honor to travel to Vietnam with Dr. DePastino. There were 16 of us. When I visited Vietnam recently, I visited a war museum where there were war photos displayed. I heard people express that they were appalled, sickened by the war photos. Welcome to the reality of war. The photos expose war for what it is. And I will say to anyone who never served in combat, be grateful every day of your life that you have experienced war only through photos. The last character that viewed the documentary as a history student and a 68-year-old human being. Vietnam was a political conflict, not a military war. My impression is it was created by Vietnamese politicians and military commanders in collaboration with Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, their cabinets, military commanders, the Senate, the Congress, and the media for the purpose of power, prestige, profit, political gain, and personal gratification, resulting in pain, suffering, destruction, and death. They had the power to not enter any conflict in Vietnam. They had the power to withdraw from Vietnam at any time, especially in 1968, when we were all aware of what was happening. They chose not to. So for 7 more years, they sustained the political conflict, resulting in 27,184 Americans, hundreds of thousands of North, South Vietnamese military and civilians being killed, including civilians in Laos and Cambodia. which our politicians and powers to be denied we ever had troops in Laos and Cambodia. Civilians that were killed in Vietnam were referred to as collateral damage. It's a term that I find inhumane and repulsive. Civilians were not collateral damage. They were human beings. But then, to conclude, I don't expect anything less than the powers who created the Vietnam travesty.
Thank you, Andy. Ed, you have the unfortunate role of following that up. That was quite a powerful statement, a forceful statement from Andy. Tell me about what you thought, what your response was. Were you eager to watch this? Was this something you wanted to put off, or how did you feel about watching it?
I certainly was eager to watch it. In fact, I had set my DVR to tape the episodes before I wound up in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And so I watched the first 8 of the 10 episodes there, and the last 2 at home. I want to concur with Andy. I don't think any of our presidents of either party were committed to winning this war or had any idea how to. But I felt every one of us was doing exactly what the Americans in World War II had done. I didn't make any distinction, and I just felt it was my turn, our turn, and we were going to do it. For me, the only episode of the 10 that did not stir me and infuriate me in one way or another was the first episode, because it was essentially a cogent background of how we got into the war and increased our role in it from year to year, beginning with Truman in the late 40s. And for me, the most interesting single remark made comes at the beginning of episode 1, when we hear somebody say, "For years nobody talked about Vietnam, never said a word about it. It was so divisive." And that's exactly how I felt all of us were responding when we came back to the States. Just one of the millions, but I put it aside completely for 47 years. I had hardly a friend who knew I'd even been there. In fact, they didn't know I was in the Army. And 3 years ago, someone invited me to a Veterans Breakfast Club breakfast at Christ United Methodist Church, which happened to be quite near my house. And I went, and I've been hooked on this for the past 3 years, and I'm in 9 military veterans organizations now, and I'm eager to reflect on this and to hear everybody else speak on the subject of his experience and how he perceives it. One of the things that occurred to me while watching the series is that, and I had forgotten about this too, is that when we were over there, we could not differentiate the South Vietnamese from the North Vietnamese. Occasionally somebody would give us a snarky smile or something and we'd have reason to be suspicious, but that was not normally the case. But trying to differentiate between our allies and our enemies was something like trying to differentiate between Pennsylvanians and Ohioans. We look alike, we sound alike. Something that disturbed me as the series went on was that as it progressed, it seemed to me Ken Burns was being less narrative and more in a mind to balance what he was showing us. And by the time we got into the protesters, I was furious. To me, they were our greatest enemy. They did nothing for any of us. And I am telling you here and now, if I could resurrect the thousands, the 58,000 who died in that war, and replace them with protesters, I would do it in a heartbeat. Those people, our greatest enemies. And although I came back to town very inconspicuously on a bus from New York City and arrived early in the morning and then took a local bus home, many were greeted at the airports across the country in an unspeakably cruel way, and I will never forgive them for that. I put that aside for a long time, and it's been reawakened lately. But part of what makes it tolerable is that being in all of these military veterans groups I am surrounded by brothers who seem to feel exactly as I do, and I am so proud to be one of them.
And I might just interject, we have my good friend and colleague Nick Grimes sitting here in the front row, and Nick is a veteran, Army veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. And he'll tell you when he came home from Afghanistan after both tours, who was it waiting at the airport for him? Wasn't the World War II vets, wasn't the Korean War vets, it was the Vietnam veterans out in full force, making sure that this latest generation of veterans coming home did not get treated the way they did. And I know, Nick, you will be forever grateful to the Vietnam veterans serving you in that way. And I might also add, I don't want to talk, but I do want to say, who said they felt they were just like a World War II? It was you, Ed. You know, I think of this generation, after working with veterans for so long, this Vietnam generation it's not the counterculture generation. It's not the hippie generation. It's a service generation. They were the ones who responded to the call that John F. Kennedy gave his inaugural address in January 1961 in enormous numbers. There are far more names on that wall in Washington, D.C., killed in Vietnam than ever went to Canada. Far more. It was I think the elements of the anti-war movement got a lot of attention, but these guys and most of the generation, 40% served in the military. 40% of the men of that generation served in the military. They just did their jobs, served their country. You know, one of the interesting things about this series, and this is happening in scholarship more broadly, is we are getting new perspectives on the enemy side. There's been more and more written because since the fall of the Soviet Union, the opening up of archives in Vietnam, the tightening relationship between Vietnam and the United States today, archives have opened up. There aren't that many scholars who speak Vietnamese, read Vietnamese, Russian, and Chinese. And the ones who do are all in Vietnam. And they're writing histories of their side. And it's fascinating. We're learning a lot from it. The North Vietnamese were very different from the Viet Cong in the South, often opposed to one another. They had a lot of divisions among each other, a lot of disagreements. And the enemy has a lot of airtime in the Ken Burns series. I found it very striking to hear that testimony. What did you guys think of it? Hearing from the enemy side. Does anybody want to answer that? Pick up that mic and answer it.
The North Vietnamese Army was a full-time, blown-out army, fully equipped and capable of doing anything that we could do. The South Vietnamese Army was misfits, not well organized or structured or trained, and the VC, the Viet Cong, were even worse.
Who were you fighting mostly, Ron?
Mostly VC, a few NVA, but not very many. They would come down as leaders for the VC, is where we make contact with them. In the area that I was in, you had to look at any male who was older than the age of 12 and under the age of 50 and figure he was a soldier somewhere, either for the South Vietnamese, the VC, or the NVA.
You had no idea which.
No, but he wasn't home. He wasn't in the village. When you would go through the villages, you did not see males between the ages of 12 and 50. They weren't there. The NBA or the VC had it worse because they had nothing. They had a pair of shorts and a pair of sandals and maybe an AK-47 rifle and a bag of rice. And that was it. But the Vietnam War was a civil war.
Yeah.
And we had no business being involved in a civil war. They needed to figure that out for themselves. And it was the missteps we took after World War II that led us up to the point to where we were.
George, would you agree with that statement, that we had no business being involved in that Civil War?
Not at all. I don't think it was a civil war unless you think the North Korea-South Korea war was a civil war. You know, one army invaded another country. They both happened to be Koreans in the Korea situation, and I didn't see the North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese as a civil war. The North Vietnamese largely intended to establish a communist government. Whenever they wanted to get some sympathy, they were talking about independence. But independence meant, we're going to be independent communist country. And so this is one of those situations that is not easily summarized. It's just not easily summarized. Every time I watched one of those episodes, there was something in there I had an argument with. So,
Tell me one of them. Like, what you mean, an argument with what they were presenting?
oh no, I didn't think it was not factual. I thought it was factual, but I thought that the North Vietnamese people, and especially the members in the North Vietnamese army, were completely propagandized. And they were committed to fighting and independence, and they didn't realize, nor were they told, the great majority of them, that what this really was going to mean is we were going to take over this country and make it a communist country. And so, but in the seeds of all of those statements is the things that we should have done as a country and as our political and military leadership. I think we could have easily said, we want to give you independence. Okay, remember one of the comments they said there were going to be elections between the North and the South. That those elections were never held because they largely figured out that it was going to be the North would win the election, maybe out of lack of interest. The counter to that is what happened in Tet. The North Vietnamese political leadership fully believed that the South Vietnamese army, the ARVN, would fold and desert, and all the people would rise up and welcome the NVA. And they were completely wrong in that. I was glad to hear that they got that so wrong. Because from one set of perspectives, everything we did was bad, and everything that they did was good. And now you see, no, it wasn't that good. And they took incredible numbers of casualties.
Tet was a catastrophe for North Vietnam and for the Vietnam.
An absolute catastrophe.
From which they never actually recovered. It was
An absolute catastrophe.
Horrid catastrophe. Let me put you on the spot. I'm going to put George on the spot. And I'm going to put the rest of you on the spot. Let's take you back to July 1965. And Lyndon Johnson is president. He has been told by every military advisor, the independent, non-communist state that we have in the South, the Republic of Vietnam, you know, that we've kind of supported and tried to protect from communism, the communist insurgency in the South, and from infiltration from North to South. This independent, non-communist state in the South, it's got weeks, not months, to survive unless we put a huge infusion of U.S. soldiers on the ground. 50,000 to start out with, and then 50,000 a month after that. What decision do you make? Do you say, let it fall, let it become communist, or do you say, we've got to stop them, we've got to protect this non-communist state?
I think you say we have to protect this non-communist state, but we have to do what's right. And we can't continue to support a dictatorship in the South who was just out, as much as I hate to say it, many other countries that we supported in that time period, if they were non-communist dictators, we supported them anyway. And I think that was our opportunity to say, we'll help you. We'll help South Vietnam be independent and stay non-communist. But in return, we want to see the people get a better deal. Because they were getting a bad deal from the regular South Vietnamese government.
So put more demands on the South Vietnamese government
Yes,
before strings should be attached.
Yes.
Andy, I'm going to pass it down to you. I think I know the answer to this, but put yourself in Lyndon Johnson's shoes in July 1965. South Vietnam is going to fall. Do you support it and protect it, or do you let it fall?
I'll respond to that comment. If our objective was to prevent communism from spreading and controlling Vietnam, we failed. Vietnam is a communist country today. And as a result of our failure and a result of Johnson and all of our presidents and politicians intervening, we paid the price of losing 58,318 Americans and 4 million Laos, Cambodians, North and South Vietnamese people. Did we succeed? Did we succeed preventing communism, or did we succeed in a disaster and killing people?
So your answer is no. Let it fall. Ron?
War is hell. And the people who make the decisions to go fight war send their kids out to fight the war. They should go out and fight the war. I still think it was a civil war. North Vietnamese became communist, but only because Ho Chi Minh traveled the world looking for help to establish a country, an independent country. And everybody turned their back on him, except for Russia and China. So to get the help they needed from Russia and China, they became a communist nation.
Yeah, most historians agree that Ho Chi Minh was really more about nationalism than he was about communism. And his communism tended to be very focused on land reform, which is important in an agricultural country. Ho Chi Minh was a dictator. He had his political opponents assassinated. He purged the party with thousands and thousands and thousands of people killed. But he wasn't quite the Stalin or the Mao that he was depicted when you were in the army.
And South Vietnam was corrupt. And the different presidents that came and went, they were always corrupt. It was what they could get out of it for themselves, not what they could do for the country. They didn't have a strong leader in the South who was, let's make this a united Vietnam.
Ed, do you have a perspective on this? Oh, I'm sorry, Andy. You have something to add?
You and I just returned from Vietnam. When I was there in '68, I experienced the country, I experienced the people. What I experienced on our trip is people were a heck of a lot better off today, even though they're under communism, than their country destroyed and their people murdered.
I gotta say, having just come from Vietnam, especially spending a lot of time in North and South, it's hard to fly out of Tan Son Nhut Airport, beautiful international airport. Tan Son Nhut, some of you will remember that as a base that was shelled daily in the Vietnam War. It's hard to leave that city and think that we lost that war. There's so much American influence. So they love Americans so much. The more economic cooperation or trade they could get, the better for them. They really see the U.S. as their model for economic growth. And increasingly, this is the most interesting thing, while we were there in Vietnam, the USS Carl Vinson, a U.S. aircraft carrier, was docked just a mile offshore. They brought a party of dignitaries ashore to begin negotiating closer military ties, because the Vietnamese, what they told us everywhere we went, especially in the South, was that we love Americans, we don't like the Chinese. And we want you to protect us from the Chinese. And it kind of dawns on you, we're not really natural enemies of the Vietnamese people. The Vietnam and Chinese, they're kind of natural enemies, and they have been for thousands of years. But
yeah, the Vietnamese people, especially in the South, they paid a hell of a price for that war. But in many ways, they are better off now and will be in the future because of our influence on them. As I've told Todd for several years now, they are red hat capitalists. Yeah, they're communists, they're wearing a red hat and a gold star, but they were every bit of capitalists as I've ever seen anywhere.
yeah. And you can't help but think that the U.S. had enormous, that our years, our presence there for so long, absolutely left a stamp on that country. Ed, do you have anything to say with regard to whether we ever should have gotten involved in Vietnam or not?
Despite my experience and having watched this series, I am still confused on that issue. I'm aware of some perspectives expressed in the series that both renewed feelings I had about it and added to the confusion. One of the things I think it underplayed was the nature of most of the South Vietnamese people. I don't think anybody in this country lives with the abject poverty that people over there routinely did, living in corrugated shacks and working very hard, long hours, some of them even doing our laundry, cleaning up our areas. I've never seen poverty like that in the United States, and I don't think that was even a part of the series.
Yeah,
But another thing that
very good point.
I found so powerful about it was the parts in the last few episodes about the POWs and what an awful struggle they had, even if they survived. To me, the single most compelling part of any of the 10 episodes involved a POW who was released and said, and was able to give the names of all of the other people in his POW compound. And the way he did it was using the melody of Old MacDonald's Farm and integrating the names of all of the people in that POW camp, so that when he came out, he could start to sing Old MacDonald's Farm and the names would come to him one after another in a litany. Another thing I found interesting and generally not offensive were the perspectives of the North Vietnamese survivors. All of us who were there are between, say, 65 and 77 years of age, and it was unexpectedly enlightening to see some of them commenting on camera without malice in most cases about their experience of the war, because it was like the mirror image of our own.
Totally. I mean, I watched some of of that series with my younger daughter, my 17-year-old daughter. Oh my gosh, I pity her for having to watch this next to me. Because I'm kind of talking to the TV the whole time. And every time one of these North Vietnamese vets would talk, I'd say, that's exactly what one of our vets would say. I've heard our vets use those same words, same description of combat, the impact on the family, the mothers who lose children. Something universal about that experience. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ed.
No, I was finished.
Okay. Well, let me, maybe I'll take, I think we have another microphone. I thought, because we have so many veterans in the audience tonight who may have questions for the panels, may want to weigh in on some of the things we've been discussing. I think it would be wonderful if maybe if you had a comment to make your comment and then see if you could pose a question to the panel. There we go. Questions? Bob Matthews. Yes. Okay. We're going to make you stand, Bob. This is Bob Matthews, who is a Vietnam veteran and also a well-known historian of the war, who has produced Lessons of Vietnam, which is a kind of a learning package that has been used in hundreds of schools throughout the country for the past 20 years. We're honored to have you here, Bob.
Thank you guys for coming today. I really appreciate your comments. I'm a retired teacher, just moved back to Pennsylvania from North Carolina, and we've had the luxury there of introducing a course called Lessons of Vietnam to teach a nation. And we have our course now in over 3,000 schools nationwide. And the main thing we wanted to do tonight was to, with the Ken Burns series, is to let everybody know that, you already know this, but Vietnam has almost come full circle. As one of the gentlemen mentioned, we first came home, it was taboo. I was teaching in Meadville, Pennsylvania as a rookie, and I was told to shut up about Vietnam. And they said, we don't talk about that. So it took me 20 years to talk about Nam and teach about it. And the other day, or a couple months ago, I was invited to Edinburgh State College to talk to the seniors. And everything you guys have said tonight, they all watch Ken Burns. I opened it up for 90 minutes of questions. And believe me, what a thrill it was. And I'm sure I'm speaking for all the Vietnam veterans. What a thrill it was to look at 45 seniors in college that actually cared about what you said. Because we came home, other than my family and my wife, of course, no one could even talk about it.
Yeah.
We were so uninformed. And one more quick thing is, one of the gentlemen said, when you were in Nam, you were like in the movie theater. You knew where you were, you watched the movie you're doing, you did your daily job. When you came out, it was back to the world. And when I started to teach Vietnam, all I knew was what I did. You can't teach that way. I had to go back to Vietnam, which I did, and learn a lot about it, and listen to veterans forever, and finally put together a curriculum. And it's been very successful, but it's because of guys like you that were willing to get over your anger and perhaps your disappointment in America. You know, we love this country. All we wanted to do was have you care about us. So when you said, okay, you could teach a course on Vietnam, I said, well, thank you. And we did. And my one question I want to talk about, Ken Burns, I'm going to ask one of the panel members is, you mentioned the people at home that you would switch them with the people on the wall, the demonstrators. What do you think about the group that demonstrated against the war that were Vietnam veterans? Vietnam veterans against the war, when they came home, started to speak nationally, and a lot of vets joined them. Can I get your opinion on those, please? Ken barely mentioned them in the series.
Who stated it? Who stated it?
I think Ed stated it about the protesters.
Right.
Andy, would you care to answer this question?
What would you think about me, Ed?
I'd be one.
Andy joined Vietnam Veterans Against the War when he came home. Why did you join that organization?
It was time to end it.
It was time to end
It
it.
was time to end it. It was time to bring our men and women home.
Can I ask you, Andy, was this a revelation that you had after you were wounded and got home, or was this something that dawned on you when you were there? Like there's something wrong.
It did not dawn on me there.
It did not
I
dawn on you.
was informed and taught by those who had been there for months before I was, and who informed me of what this political conflict that they anticipated was about. and just the nature of the guerrilla warfare, just the nature of taking a hill, taking a mountain, taking that, and just walking away from it. What was the objective? What was the purpose? As we continued to have our men killed, and then we killed others, what was the objective? If we had an objective there, I would have supported the conflict. If it was a military war, I would have been all in. I was not in support of a political conflict.
Thank you, Andy, very much. Do we have any other questions? Oh, yes, Chuck.
I'd like to make a comment.
Use the microphone. There you
I'd like to
go.
make a comment about the war. The last one, you notice when the Ho Chi Minh's people took over, they weren't Boy Scouts. They did the old Lenin Bolshevik playbook. You collectivize the farms, you control the food, you control the people. It was sad over there. The priest, Father Dahm up at St. Gabe's, he's not there now. Anytime you had communists take over a government, what's the first thing you see? Boat people. He was a boat people. He got out in 82 or 83. It was terrible there. Once the Soviet Union fell, the Clinton administration recognized Vietnam, that's when you're going to see all this prosperity and the people are living better. Not under Ho Chi Minh's people, they were all dead. I want to make that point very clear.
Yeah, when Saigon fell on April 30th, 1975, and the country was unified under communist rule, Ho Chi Minh was long dead. He had been out of power for 8 years at least. He had been very sick. And leadership of the country was taken over by a very radical, I mean, if somebody, should be hanged for crimes, it's Le Duan, who took over the Communist Party of Vietnam and really drove that country into the ground. Ho Chi Minh opposed the Tet Offensive. Le Duan's the one who pushed it. And then after the communists came to power, Le Duan imposed collectivization of agriculture, devastating the country. By 1982, 1983, Vietnam was one of the poorest countries, along with Haiti, on earth. That bad. Mass starvation throughout the country.
A famine in one of the greatest rice-producing areas in the world.
The rice basket of the world, starving to
death. That's what we were
death.
fighting against, my man.
Yes.
I respect your opinion, but that's what we were against. Same thing in Korea. Look at North Korea and South Korea. It's the same group of people, the same man.
However, I must say, Chuck, then after that, it got so bad that in 1986, Le Duan died, and the Communist Party, still in power, said we've got to open this economy up. Doi Moi, and man, did the economy take off. Most favored nation status, I think in 92, maybe, 93, and then World Trade Organization status in maybe 2000, 2001.
A lot of the older people have died, and the younger people were taking it over, and that's where they was able to,
right.
straighten the country out.
Right. Thank you, Chuck.
I hate to interrupt you. I just want to get that through before I was done. Anybody else? Okay.
John Barber, you're a Marine, but we'll let you talk.
I just wanted to know how many veterans here fought in Vietnam to fight communists?
Well, let's just ask, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I am curious, could you stand up if you are a Vietnam era veteran? If you served in the military during the Vietnam War? That is quite something. And so now, John, you're asking, so if you served, were you serving to fight communism? Was that your motivation, your internal motivation?
No, I was not there to fight communists. I was there to fight to protect my brothers and for them to protect me so I could come home. I didn't learn about all this stuff that the government was telling us years and years later. We were over there fighting. We didn't know what was going on. You're in a foxhole. It's 112 degrees. I didn't want a cold drink of water. I didn't want a steak. I didn't want a naked woman with me. I just wanted to see the sunshine the next day so I could live and fight another day. you know, that's just the way it was. You fight. I was there for 13 months. Hopefully, you could go home, and I went back again. But Andy, there's some things I don't agree with you, and some things I do agree with you. But you put your name on that dotted line, your butt belongs to Uncle Sam. And you go where he sends you. And you do what you have to do to survive. And that's what I did. That's it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Todd. During our training, prior to Vietnam, basic training, advanced infantry training, we were told we were going to fight communism. That's why we were going there. But like everyone else that's been in combat or says, when you get there, you're fighting for the guy next to you because he's fighting for you.
Right, right. It gets real very quickly. Clem Blazewick, Vietnam veteran. 93rd EVAC Hospital, Long Binh, right, Clem?
Right, yes,
All
sir.
right.
Thank you. One of the opening statements that was said today was by Mr. George Bornak about we were there, we were doing our jobs, our daily jobs, and you just didn't know about all the politics and everything else. Well, I worked in a hospital, 93rd EVAC Hospital in Long Binh as a lab tech. And from January 4th to December 18th of 66, January 4th of 65, I'm sorry, to December 18th of 66, I could tell you every single day there were injuries, there were casualties, and you really saw and witnessed an awful lot. And through that time period, every day, when you see these soldiers coming in, and I mean, many different types of injuries that they would have. And then occasionally we would get a VC or a North Vietnamese in the hospital, and we had to tend to them and treat them, etc. Well, the point of my discussion is, not only me, but I think every single person at the hospital grew to hate the North Vietnamese and the VC. And I mean, it was a very strong hatred through the years. If you witnessed seeing all these soldiers coming in all battered up, you just felt that, hey, it could have been this VC or North Vietnamese, whoever, that we're treating that caused these injuries and these casualties. One of the things that this PBS series with Ken Burns did for me, when they talked about the North Vietnamese families and the number of and their sons and brothers and that being killed, it changed the hate that I had through the years. That continued through all those years. It made me feel that, hey, yeah, these are real people too. They're humanitarians, and that hatred that I had in me through the years just changed by hearing and seeing that in the series. And I just don't have that hatred today that I carried through all those years. Thank you.
Fascinating. Yes, and then how about right here, and then Larry in the back.
I can tell you that I spent a lot of money on psychos to try to get over it after 20 years of being there. And we didn't talk about it. And I noticed a lot of comments people made, but I'll tell you the worst enemy.
Oh, can you put the mic a little closer so everybody can hear you?
The worst enemy I had was my own family. I hate to say that, but they would write to me and try to tell me what they read about the war when I came home. The day I came home, I drove away. I couldn't talk to my own family about what really happened versus what they read about, you know? And I'd say I had a lot of hatred too, but after, like I say, a lot of money and visiting and getting overseas and your buddies get killed and stuff, you know, we fought for survival, and everybody said the same stories. But now in my older age, I own a strip mall, and I have Vietnamese who do your nails mani-pedi, and I just think of it. I don't hate them because when you look at the war from what were they fighting for, it was, like you said, it's the same thing. they thought they were out to fight for their country. We thought we were out to fight for our country and our values. And it's been it's been a long time, but it's time to get over.
Were you Army?
No, I was Navy Air I was on a ammo ship, on a helicopter crew on an ammo ship.
Helicopter crew on an ammo ship?
Yeah, we did medevacs, but we transferred ammunition to other ships that were off the coast.
Got it.
Okay. So, I still don't sleep much. I get more hours of sleep than I have in a long time, but when I got home from Nam, I probably slept 4 hours a day. But seeing when we left, we were on demand. We worked 16 hours a day and we had 4 off.
Yeah.
You don't sleep with one eye open.
Right.
And some people, and I have pictures when I had really big beards, and someone said, "Oh, the Navy, they didn't like you to have beards." When you were there, they allowed you to do anything you want as long as you got up to fight when you had to. And like I say, we fought for our buddies. We just hoped the next day we woke up to see the sun and be on the right side of looking down at the daisies instead of up at the daisies. But anyway, I'm glad I could not watch the whole series. I recorded it, but I haven't watched it.
Hard to get through.
Still. And I know George and a bunch of people here. I think it's good now because we can talk among ourselves, but it's still hard to talk to the general public.
Right.
And talk to our kids and our grandkids. And I thank the Lord I'm here, but I don't want to ever see that again. But I thought we went to war to stop all wars, and it just seems like it never ends. So my heart goes out to all the kids that are fighting now in wars, and medicine's come a long way. They can, I'm a runner, but they can run pretty fast with all the new prosthetics and all that. So, but anyway, I thank everybody for coming, and I hope we can continue to tell the story and get it out while we're still here. So,
thank you very much. Larry Woods in the back. We finally get the Air Force represented here. Air Force Security Forces at Tuiwac. Oh yeah, he had a maid.
Yep, sea rations every night because we worked on the perimeter. I wanted to, first off, I'd like to thank Todd. The Veterans Breakfast Club, as a number of people, Ed said the same thing. I think a number of veterans from Vietnam didn't talk about their service at all until within the last 3, 4, 5 years. And the Veterans Breakfast Club has been a big part of that. And I think a lot of people have opened up as a result of that. So thank this guy because he's done a really great job of honoring the service of veterans. The other thing is I'd like to thank him because as a result of the Veterans Breakfast Club, I was one of the 16 that went on the trip back to Vietnam this past beginning of this month, and was over there with Andy and his lovely wife and Ben Wright. One of the things that struck me, the two most and we had a lot of emotional moments. Two most emotional moments that we had, or at least that I had. One was getting to meet a young man who was 28, who at the age of 10 was playing with his friends and picked up what they thought was just a metal object in a field. And it turned out to be a cluster bomb, which was still left over. We dropped more armaments on Quang Tri province, which is just that little tiny province below the DMZ, than were dropped in all of World War II. So think about that, how many bombs were dropped in that one area. And the Pentagon admits that over 10% never exploded. So there are still armaments that are still exploding today. Well, when those kids played with that, it killed his two friends, blew out both of his legs, half of one arm, and the hand on the other side, he only had 3 fingers. Plus it also damaged his eye. And that was 18 years ago. But he had no animosity towards Americans. He had no anger. He was one of the most polite, cheerful people I've ever met. He uses 2 prosthetics to walk, and he went on and he got his degree in computer science from Da Nang University. So that kind of being able to meet somebody like that and seeing people that have suffered from Agent Orange and the devastation that that's done was just incredible. And the other experience happened to Andy, and I'd like him to, if you don't mind. We had been at a museum and he ran into a gentleman, Vietnamese gentleman, who had been an NVA. He had been one of the enemy. and he saw Andy, and the experience that he had with that gentleman up here probably changed my life as well. Would you mind talking about that, Andy?
No. Thank you.
When I encountered this gentleman and was informed he was an NVA, this man broke down uncontrollably, crying, hugged me, and would not let go of me. I perceived it as two warriors respecting one another. Now, my trip to Vietnam elicited a couple of different responses from brothers who I served with. They feel as though I betrayed them by returning to Vietnam and associating with the Vietnamese people. My experience engaging that NVA soldier was very cathartic. What I have never done, nor will I ever do, is apologize to anyone for any of my actions, behaviors that I committed over in Vietnam. I was there, as I've stated, I was there to survive, to protect and defend my brothers, whatever it took. So it was very enlightening and rewarding to meet what I refer to as a created enemy. And again, it was just two warriors respecting one another.
Thank you, Andy. Ron, you also met, didn't you, when you went to Vietnam, you met some Viet Cong?
Right, we were at a place called Friendship Village, which was west of Hanoi. And it was originally established by some U.S. soldiers to help treat handicapped children and orphans. And over the years, they started dealing with Vietnamese soldiers who weren't doing very well. They were given a chance to come in for 1 month where they would get new clothes, get physicals, get medications, try to help them learn some skill sets that they might use when they went back home to the village. While we were there, we went into a conference room, and there were probably 30 NVA soldiers there. Myself, an interpreter, and a cameraman.
So you were outnumbered.
Very much so. And I was introduced as to when I was in country, where I served with the 1st Infantry Division near Tay Ninh and rubber plantations, and we fought the VC. I was a rifle platoon, radio operator, and they started laughing and pointing to one guy in the group, and it turned out he was my counterpart. He was the VC in the same area at the same time, and the radio operator for his rifle platoon when I was there.
And what was it like to meet him? I mean, did you say like, hey, how you doing?
We shook hands and hugged each other, and we were brothers of combat. So we're brothers.
Ed, you had something to say.
Thank you. I was afraid I wouldn't get to say it. I have an answer for Andy. I defend your right to be a protester because you earned it. And you were not part of the circus that rallied against most of our brothers.
I think we have time for one more question, comment. Chuck, for Turkey, another Marine.
I'd like to wrap this up by saying we haven't learned a damn thing in all these years. We keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Why we have to send our kids to a foreign country to have them maimed, killed, without an objective to win, I don't understand it. I always thought when we were going to go to war, the whole country would be behind us like in World War II. There'd be factories producing armaments, there'd be rations, there'd be a country behind us. And there's never been that since World War II. I feel sorry for the Iraqis, I feel sorry for the Afghanistan veterans, because you're Vietnam veterans all over again. We have the power to win. But when you have politicians telling you where you can bomb, where you can't bomb. I was in a DMZ and we couldn't cross that DMZ. Why? I was next to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We couldn't go down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Why? Why do we have rules? You're fighting a war to win. So I just hope, I don't know, with this thing in Syria, wherever we're going to go next, we don't send any more men. We send nukes, we send bombers, but no more men. Let God sort them out. But we have to quit sending our young kids to come home with brain injuries and missing arms and legs. I don't want to see any more of that.
I would just like to conclude this evening with clarifying that although we have differences of opinions and impressions about our experiences in war, because each of us experienced war individually, but I can assure you that I have the utmost respect for every veteran and consider every veteran my brother, despite our differences of opinion.
And I would like to make the note that today's military is a volunteer military. And I take off my hat to you and your brothers who have taken up the arms to do our work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful sentiment to end on. I would like to thank the library and the Peters Township Library Foundation, which has refreshments there. Mara is standing there with the refreshments. I'd like to thank all the veterans and others who showed up tonight to contribute and to listen, and to our esteemed panelists, who were all very civil. Thank you.
And Todd, we certainly want to give you a round of applause for the way you weave the stories and the questions and the answers.
And I would just urge anybody who does not get our newsletter in the mail to just come out and fill out a contact sheet. We'd love to have you, send you our schedule and have you come to any event you can make. Thank you.
Absolutely. Also, if you wanted to get more history on the war, different perspectives, we do have all of these books here available for checkout. It is the library. This is National Library Week, and the theme is Libraries Lead. And we're really proud and honored to hear your stories because you're leading us with more information and background. So it's all a team effort, and we do appreciate leading together. So thank you. Good night.